So, I have a pergola to build, and the way this house is laid out meant there was limited room above the sliding door for the rafters to fit. The solution? A sliding dovetail. The client and I had decided against visible hardware, such as joist hangers or brackets, so I opted to create a sliding dovetail joints for the rafters. Now, I just picked up a 3D printer and never used it on a job before. Never used one at all, actually, and so I thought, how hard can it be? Countless hours of failed prints later, I was standing in my shop wondering if I'd just torched the whole job before I'd even started. The video is about whether a brand new 3D printer straight out of the box can actually pull its weight on a time-sensitive pay gig, what went wrong, and what I bodged to make it work, and whether I'd do it again. So, the pergola itself is fairly straightforward. The problem is that the beam has to sit quite close to the ceiling so that it doesn't block the glass door, which means the rafters can't be sitting on top of the beam as mentioned earlier, and metal joist hangers aren't really an option. So my solution is joinery. A sliding dovetail makes sense. It's strong, clean, and no metal. The issue is the router jig. You can get one out of the US, but I'm currently in Poland with a tight deadline. There's actually another one that's made out of metal for about $3,000 too much, and it's the wrong size too, which means I'm screwed. Which is where the 3D printer comes in. It's as good of a time as any to actually learn to use it. So I measure up the rafter stock, I draw up what I need, and I send the first print. The print itself came out better than I expected, and it felt amazing to see something you drew on a computer come to life on a printer. But when I tried it against the timber, it was too tight. After design adjustments and a reprint, something still was not right. The tenon isn't holding the way I want it to, and it's time to switch router bits from an 8-degree dovetail to a 15-degree one so that it holds stronger. Every little change means there's another print, which means I have to do another check whether it fits correctly. And that loop actually ran for several days, each print taking up about 3 hours to do. All this while being aware that the client isn't paying me to stand in the shop and watch the printer cycle. And at some point I had to decide, keep chasing the perfect fit or go with what I had and just sort it out on site. So I went with what I had. I did this test and it worked really well. So I printed this thing, but to make it fit nicely onto my joists, I had to add some wood. Of course I could print more elements, but that takes way too much time and it's not immediate, and mistakes can happen and it takes plastic, whilst these scraps of wood, they're here, so I might as well do them. And it makes the whole thing a lot more stiff because it was a little bit flimsy when it was just hanging out past the joist ends, and it would bend the template a little bit, and this kind of stiffens it, and it works really well. It works way better than I initially thought when I initially tested this. So yeah, here we go. This joint is super strong, like I can't even get it back out. Like, it's impossible to get out. I have to beat it with a hammer well, I had to beat this in with a hammer. You can kind of, I don't know if you can see, but it's been, yeah, I haven't taken good care of it, but it works really well. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I don't have space to put screws from the back, and I don't want any hardware, because it's a nice pergola where you're gonna sit and stare at it. It's not inside of a house package, so wall package, so yeah. The day after this test, I routed all this joinery only to realize that the fit is slightly loose. What I hadn't accounted for was the router color. The clearance between the collar and the jig wall means my passes are coming out slightly inconsistent, like it's not sitting exactly, the bit isn't sitting exactly in the center of the collar. And the fit ends up about 95% of where it needs to be, just a touch loose. And the fix that I came up with isn't elegant. I built up the tenon with layers of finish until the fit tightens up, and then I'm using expendable polyurethane wood glue to pick up any remaining slack, like Gorilla Glue essentially. Alright, this was the step I was most worried about, because there's only so much clearance. But I've just jigged something up where it could just make it a little bit lower, and now it's all lined up, ready to go into place. So good. Alright, let's do it. Yeah. It holds, and once the pergola is together, you'd never know. It holds actually better than I thought. Like, I had to really work my way in to make sure it sits in correctly. But it's not how I'd want to solve it. Next time I'll have to play around with that color and make it a little bit more precise, so I don't have to worry about building up layers of finish and stress as well. So, would I do it again? Yeah, but not exactly like this. The printer earned its place. I'm in Poland, I needed a custom jig, and I couldn't source one. It solved that. What it couldn't solve was my inexperience with it. Several days of reprints at 3 hours a cycle is a real cost on a paid job, and I got away with it because the timeline had just enough room. But What I didn't like is that you couldn't just iterate on the spot. You had to actually devote time, downtime, like spend 3 hours on printing the thing from the get-go. You can't just modify the part easily, apart from maybe screwing in some bits of wood to make it a little more rigid, or screwing through the print itself. And what I'm used to is, whilst working with wood, is easily modifying things. So yeah, the thing you need before you try this on a deadline is reps. Not many, but some. And I guess like a little bit of experience in drawing, in 3D drawing, because that really helped. The fact that I was already well versed in drawing stuff on a computer. And that color issue is the one I'd go back and fix properly. I've seen a guy secure a bearing to a router bit instead of using a color, and he used CA glue for this kind of attachment, which I'm sure works fine right up until it doesn't. So I will leave that one for someone braver than me. There's probably a cleaner solution, and I'll find it before the next job that needs this print. But the printer, it's definitely staying in the kit. Custom jigs, one-off templates, parts you can't get where you are. It covers ground that nothing else does. You might have noticed my wall drill guide partway through the video, a part that was designed by Alexander Chappelle, and all I had to do is press print on that one. For self-designed parts, you just need a bit of time with the printer before you better job on it. Getting a jig to work on a deadline reminds me how much of this trade is just problem solving with whatever you've got in front of you, which brings me to another project. A log home interior in Whistler, BC. The whole thing needed refinishing, sanding back, years of wear, rechinking, filling gaps, bringing the whole interior back from the dead. The scale of it was something else. That video's up next.